I live alone in a modest house tucked at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. No pets, no roommates, just me and the deafening silence that blankets the place once night falls. For years, I've had a love-hate relationship with the stillness, the kind that can either comfort or unnerve depending on your mood. Lately, though, it's been more of the latter. Sleep paralysis is something I've dealt with for as long as I can remember. If you've never experienced it, imagine being trapped inside your own body, unable to move or cry out for help, while your mind plays tricks on you. It started when I was a teenager, and over time, I learned to cope. I convinced myself it was just a harmless quirk of my brain, an unpleasant but manageable inconvenience. But then there was that night. I'll never forget it. It began like any other. I fell asleep around midnight, the soft hum of a fan lulling me into unconsciousness. At some point, I stirred, feeling the telltale signs of paralysis creeping over me, the weight on my chest, the inability to move even a finger. By now, I was used to it. I'd learned not to panic, to wait it out until control returned to my limbs. But this time was different. I couldn't open my eyes. That had happened before, but it wasn't common. What alarmed me more was the sensation that I wasn't alone. There was a presence in the room, and not just one. I could hear voices, low, murmuring, and disturbingly close. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the usual hallucinations that accompany sleep paralysis. But these voices didn't fade like they usually did. They stayed. I could hear them distinctly, though I couldn't make out the words. Some of them were whispering, others chuckling softly, as if they were sharing some private joke. I felt the unmistakable sensation of breath against my face, warm and damp, like someone leaning in far too close. I tried to move, to scream, anything to shake myself free of this nightmare, but my body betrayed me. The voices grew louder, more animated, as if they were excited by my struggle. One of them, deeper and raspier than the others, said something that sent chills down my spine.
"He's awake now."
They knew I could hear them. Panic surged through me, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I strained against the invisible chains holding me down, willing myself to break free, but it was no use. I was utterly helpless. And then I felt it. Hands. Cold, spindly fingers brushing against my arms, my legs, my face. They were exploring me, prodding as if I were some specimen on a table. Their touch was impossibly light, yet left a lingering sensation, as if their presence was imprinted on my skin. Finally, with what felt like a monumental effort, I forced my eyes open. What I saw made my blood run cold. Two figures stood at the foot of my bed. They were tall, impossibly so, their elongated limbs stretching unnaturally in the dim light. Their faces were featureless, except for their eyes, glittering pinpoints of light that seemed to pierce through me, and their mouths, which were twisted into grotesque, unnatural smiles. Their teeth were sharp and too numerous, like something out of a nightmare. They didn't speak, but I could feel their amusement. They were enjoying this. One of them leaned closer, its arm extending far beyond what should have been possible, and lightly touched my cheek. I recoiled internally, unable to move, as the sensation of its fingers burned into my skin. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I screamed. The sound was raw, primal, born of sheer terror. The figures flinched, their smiles faltering, and in an instant they vanished. I didn't see them move. They were simply gone. But I wasn't alone yet. From somewhere in the house, I heard a door slam. The kitchen, I realized. They were still here. Adrenaline took over, and I bolted upright, finally free from the paralysis. My legs trembled as I stumbled out of bed, fumbling for the light switch. The room flooded with light, chasing away the shadows, but it did little to calm my racing heart. I grabbed the nearest object that could serve as a weapon, a heavy lamp from my bedside table, and crept toward the kitchen. Every creak of the floorboards sounded deafening in the silence. Every shadow seemed to ripple with movement. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I rounded the corner into the kitchen. Nothing. The room was empty, just as I'd left it before going to bed. The door was shut tight, no signs of forced entry. I checked the locks, both secure. Still, I wasn't convinced. I searched the entire house, flipping on every light, peering into every closet, under every bed. There was no one there. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that those glittering eyes were still somewhere nearby, just out of sight. Eventually, I returned to my bedroom, though I knew sleep was out of the question. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching the lamp like a lifeline, and waited for the sun to rise. That was months ago, and I haven't experienced sleep paralysis since. You'd think that would be a relief, but it's not. Because now, I can't help but wonder, were those episodes really just my mind playing tricks on me? Or had they been visits from something else, something that finally decided to make itself known? Growing up in our small, quiet town, the adults always forbade us from swimming in the river at night. We, of course, didn't take them seriously. To us, the warnings were just another way the grown-ups tried to control our fun. One summer night, emboldened by the thrill of rebellion and the promise of adventure, we decided to defy the rule. The river, with its cool, glassy waters shimmering under the full moon, was far too inviting to resist. There were 4 of us, me, Jake, Tommy, and Marcus, who was the bravest or most reckless of us all. As we reached the riverbank, we hesitated for a moment, looking at each other with nervous grins, but Marcus, as expected, broke the tension. "Come on, don't tell me you're scared of a little water," he teased, already pulling off his shirt. We laughed, more at our own unease than at his joke, and started to undress. The moonlight painted everything in silver, and the river glistened like a mirror reflecting the night sky. Marcus was the first to dive in, his silhouette slicing through the air before vanishing beneath the surface with a resounding splash. We cheered as he resurfaced, shaking his head and grinning. But then, something changed. Marcus's grin faded, replaced by a look of confusion and then outright fear. His eyes widened, and he began thrashing in the water. Let go, he screamed, his voice high and panicked. At first we thought he was joking. Marcus was always pulling stunts to scare us, but the raw terror in his voice froze the laughter in our throats. He was struggling, his arms flailing as if fighting an invisible force. "Help me," he choked out, his voice breaking. We stood there, paralyzed by the shock of what we were seeing. Then, as suddenly as it began, Marcus managed to pull himself toward the shore. He crawled out of the water, collapsing onto the grass, his chest heaving and his skin pale as snow. His whole body was trembling, and his eyes, wide and bloodshot, seemed unable to focus on anything. "Marcus, what happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer at first, just sat there clutching his knees and shaking. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse and uneven. Something grabbed me," he said, his eyes darting to the river. "It grabbed my leg, like a hand. It pulled me down, hard. I thought I was going to drown." We stared at him, too stunned to speak. Goosebumps prickled my skin despite the warm night. The idea seemed absurd. How could something have grabbed him? But Marcus wasn't the kind to scare easily, and the sheer terror in his face was undeniable. The 4 of us stood there in silence, the weight of his words pressing down on us like a suffocating fog. The river, which had seemed so inviting moments ago, now felt sinister. The gentle lapping of the water against the shore sounded like whispers, low, mocking whispers. "Let's go," Tommy said finally, his voice trembling. "Let's get out of here." No one argued. We hurried back home, the thrill of our defiance completely gone, replaced by an unshakable sense of dread. That night, none of us slept well. The next day, we decided to tell our parents what had happened. Marcus's mother, a no-nonsense woman who rarely showed fear, went pale as we recounted the story. My father's jaw tightened, and after he told us, "It's the water spirit," my father said grimly. "The what?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "A spirit that lives in the river," he explained, his voice low. "It's said to drown those who swim at night, especially the ones who don't respect the water." We never went back to that river again. Even in broad daylight, the sight of its shimmering waters made my stomach churn with unease. Marcus, who had always been the fearless one, changed after that night. He stopped joining our late-night adventures and grew quieter, more withdrawn.